These problems were soon amicably settled, and on March 7th, 1946, King Judah and his people were moved from Bikini and resettled at Rongerik. But the hearts of King Judah and his people are still at Bikini. They live in hope that one day they may return. Bikini Atoll consists of 26 individual islands spread out like beads in a necklace. When the task force was created, the only hydrographic charts available were of Japanese origin. These were inadequate. A new survey of the lagoon was ordered. The USS Bowditch and the USS Sumner, with several other vessels, undertook this survey. Standard sounding methods and the new acoustic bottom scanner were used. Wire drags located horses' heads, obstructions projecting from the coral bottom. While charting continued, troublesome coral heads were blasted from channel areas and potential anchorages. Others were removed to permit submerging of target submarines to desired depths. 40 Japanese mines were located and removed. Navigational markers, buoys, and beacons were placed to simplify movement in and out of the lagoon. The Fish and Wildlife Service of the Department of the Interior endorsed the site for the tests. Fish experts predicted no appreciable damage to fishery resources as a result of the explosions. Extensive tests were initiated to determine the effects of the bursts on marine life. A fish census, before and after, was made at Bikini, to be compared with a control census taken at Rongerik. More than 20,000 fish were taken by hook, net, and seine for comparative study and analysis. Establishment of a system of supply was a major issue during these early days of the operation. To cope with this problem, Brigadier General David H. Blakelock, veteran of amphibious supply projects in the Pacific, was designated Assistant Chief of Staff for Logistics. General Blakelock was responsible for transporting, equipping, and feeding 42,000 men, and for installation of all ground facilities. Logistics for Crossroads was a tremendous task involving trains, airplanes, ships, records, fuel, construction and repair facilities, medical care, and the 1,001 jobs of servicing. Presidential delay of the tests added further complication, but eventually was contrived to afford better instrumentation. Aircraft were to play a key role in the tests. As the adaptability of aircraft for technical observation became clear, the relatively simple air plan originally proposed for the tests was expanded. The final concept of air participation utilized 150 airplanes with units from Army and Navy Air Forces. The primary air mission for Crossroads was twofold. First, to put one bomb over the target and to drop blast gauge and other recording instruments in the target area at the right time. Second, to record the effects of both blasts by instrumentation and aerial photography. An air operations plan which permitted flexibility and perfect synchronization was formulated. The lessons learned from projected practice missions were many. Compromises were made between tactical and scientific considerations. Training of air crews was initiated. At Roswell Army Airfield, New Mexico, an ideal location for practice bombing, a spirited competition began among specially trained B-29 crews for the privilege of dropping the Able Day bomb. This competition continued until shortly before Able Day. The desired bombing accuracy was within 500 feet of the bullseye, an accuracy 4 times better than required in normal combat action during World War II. Numerous devices were used to obtain great precision. These included simulated atomic bombs of correct weight, shape, and size. Among the early results were improved bombing tables and improved calculations for wind components. Photographic and instrumentation equipment was installed and tested. At Clovis, New Mexico, the Army Air Forces began tests to determine the modifications necessary to accomplish remote-controlled landings of B-17 drones, brake to a full stop, a maneuver never before attempted. After an interval of training, radio-controlled takeoffs and landings of four-engine planes were accomplished as seemingly routine procedure. Drones were flown above 25,000 feet to test the reliability of control equipment and of televising and telemetering equipment. New high-altitude electrical brushes were designed to improve television. Meanwhile, from carriers off the California coast and from air stations at Atlantic City, Brooklyn, and San Pedro, the Navy conducted training and experimentation with drone aircraft, particularly with catapult takeoffs of carrier-launched drones. During an air rehearsal on May 3rd, 1946, the first launching of a pilotless F-6F was accomplished from the deck of the Shangri-La. Control of the airplane during takeoff was exercised by a pilot sitting in a chair on the carrier deck. Extensive tests with Army B-17 drones and Navy F-6F drones developed standard operating procedures. New and advanced control techniques evolved. At the same time, 6 TBM pilots were trained for air control of 6 drone LCVPs, which were scheduled to recover water samples after each of the explosions for radiological study. Bomb-dropping rehearsals were held at the Albuquerque bombing range, and a full-scale dress rehearsal called Operation Zebra was carried out 100 miles at sea southwest of San Diego. During this operation, a simulated atomic bomb was dropped.
Between March 1st and June 5th, the air units of the task force began moving overseas for continued training. Each unit carried full complements of personnel and equipment. On Kwajalein, a small crescent-shaped island which boasted one of the finest bomber strips in the Pacific, was based Task Group 1.5, the Army Air Forces unit which operated the bombing aircraft. The group was under command of Brigadier General Roger M. Ramey of the 58th Bombardment Wing. At Eniwetok, the Army drone unit was separately based, and here intensive training in radio-controlled flights continued. Sea units, including the carrier Shangri-La, began extensive training operations in the Bikini area with drone landings at Ibai and Roy. A helicopter unit operated from the Sidor and Shangri-La and saw much service during the operations, particularly in the rescue of instruments from contaminated areas. Helicopters can hover, but without pontoons, they cannot float. This rotor plane was dunked on a practice mission. Salvage workers brought her up from the lagoon bottom to permit technicians to study the malfunction. The air movement between the United States and the Marshall Islands was tremendous. Day and night, planes flew the overseas air lanes. Their cargoes ranged from mice to men, from meat to mail. Alone, mail accounted for an average of 40,000 pounds a month. In all, 11,385 passengers and 3,280,000 pounds of freight were transported by air during the overseas period of Operation Crossroads. During the preliminary training period, the major part of the Joint Task Force personnel and equipment, including heavy shore installations, was being moved across the sea in ships. Among the data urgently desired from the atomic bomb tests was the reaction of Army equipment to such explosions, so that designs for new equipment would incorporate maximum resistance and so that new tactical doctrines and measures of passive defense might evolve. Sample equipment was gathered from the Signal Corps, Quartermaster Corps, Engineer Corps, Ordnance Department, Air Force, and Chemical Warfare Service. Coordinating these groups was the Director of Ship Material. Loading the principal equipment was mainly accomplished at West Coast ports. Careful deck layouts were made for exposure of the equipment, which was thoroughly lashed for the voyage and for the violence of atomic blast. Teams of specialists in damage assessment were organized under the Director of Ship Material to observe, record, and assess damage and to relate it to other types of damage after the tests. Test racks of Army and Navy materials were set up on target ships with weathering controls on non-target ships. The major objective of the entire experiment was analysis of the effects of atomic explosion on ships. Preparations to observe and record phenomena affecting ship structures and material were extensive and detailed. Perfection of methods and equipment for this purpose was an enormous task requiring skill, patience, imagination, and resourcefulness. Naval shipyards bustled with activity reminiscent of wartime. Alterations had to be made, new installations had to be completed, time schedules had to be met. Experts on boilers, turbines, pumps, cranes, ship fittings, electrical equipment, paints, chemicals, lubricants, and fuels had a bewildering assortment of tasks to perform. First concern of the groups, controlled by the Director of Ship Material, was the flotilla of almost 90 target ships, plus reserve target ships. All had to be placed in proper material condition. From these vessels, items of historical importance had to be removed, and equipment which was extremely valuable or scarce had to be salvaged. Wiring circuits had to be set up and diesel generators installed to provide controls and power for equipment which was to be kept operating after the target ships were abandoned. Additional wiring circuits were required for delicate recording instruments. Mounting brackets had to be installed for hundreds of instruments, from pendulums to orientometers. Assembly of data was required on the structural strength and the watertight integrity of each target ship. Serious defects resulting from war damage on some of these ships were corrected. Loading plans were drawn up and followed in precise detail. New anchoring devices were designed. Since the effect of possible high waves on anchored ships was not known, it was planned to anchor each ship with a full scope of chain on one anchor and a short scope on a second anchor. To provide an added safety factor against failure of the first anchor chain, the second chain was hung in loops with fittings designed to fracture, paying out additional chain until the surge had diminished. These fittings were manufactured at Boston Naval Shipyard. Tests were conducted at Pearl Harbor to perfect the anchoring arrangements. 14 of the target destroyers had only one hawse pipe. Portable davits were fabricated and installed to accommodate the second anchor. 130 non-target ships had to be prepared for the many tasks assigned. Aboard some, electrical circuits for instruments were installed and tested. Other ships had to be converted to laboratories. Problems were encountered with the LSM-60 and with the bathysphere in which the Baker Day bomb was to be lowered. This pressure-proof bathysphere was built at Portsmouth Naval Shipyard, where submarines are usually built. The ship was equipped with a sturdy radio mast for multiple antennas. The Cumberland Sound was transformed into a laboratory control ship with elaborate radio equipment designed to arm and detonate the Baker Day bomb. The Albemarle was converted into the bomb-carrying and assembly vessel. The Burleson, headquarters for animal research, had to be transformed into a floating barnyard with feed pens, autopsy rooms, medical storage spaces, and laboratories. The hospital ship Haven was converted to house the radiological safety section. Instrument repair shops and laboratories were installed. 2 rafts of bridging were assembled on the beach at Bikini and towed to the target array for exposure to the explosions. Material was prepared for exposure in landing craft under conditions simulating an amphibious landing. Included was heavy ordnance material in storage condition. There was little rest for workers assigned to reconversion tasks. On target ships, work continued en route to Bikini and up to the final minutes before evacuation of the lagoon for the tests.